Here we go. It's 3.3, Polishing the Higher Level Essay, our last video for the unit and the semester. The lesson objective: students will be able to write very clear, error-free language in an appropriate register and style. So we're talking about criterion D here and our use of language. The question that I want you to have in your mind: how do I score high on criterion D? Well, the key is really focusing in on your writing and reading, rereading, and revising, being a tireless reviser. But let me give you some specifics about things you can look for as you revise. So let's dig in here. The very best way to revise is to read out loud. Have I said this before? This little kitty is reading his text out loud. And that is how you are going to be able to make your writing more precise and clear. Read it out loud to yourself, read it out loud to somebody else. Slow down, and instead of rushing through the paragraphs, read each sentence how it is on the paper, not how you intended it in your head, but how it is on the page or the electronic screen. Okay, how is it going to come across to a reader who hadn't already been thinking this idea in their head? You're going to find those awkward sentences when you read it out loud and when you slow down, especially if you are reading to somebody else. It'll feel awkward reading it to them, and you'll find them more easily. And then, of course, you're going to revise them. And this is easier said than done, right? It takes some real brain power to do this, to write that revised, less awkward sentence, to ask yourself, what is it I was really trying to say here? And how can I say it more clearly? All right. How about the next question? How can I make my writing more precise and clear? Well, make each sentence work. If the sentence is not working in some function, get rid of it. Here are some strategies to make sure you're making sentences work. First of all, use active verbs. Any to be and then a verb should be changed. Get rid of the to be part and just make it the verb. Get rid of repeating words. Don't repeat yourself. Say it once. Be clear and concise. Say it in as few words as possible and then move on to the next idea. Get rid of filtering devices. Filtering devices are words that are not helping your meaning. They typically are kind of a restated question where you're using the language of analysis but not doing analysis. So let's take a look at what this means exactly. I've got an example here for us. This is from one of your classmates, and it's a good paragraph. It just could use some revision. And of course, I wasn't grading criterion D when this student wrote this paragraph, so go easy on them, all right? Here's the paragraph. He also seems to be talking directly to the readers as he says, "It's time to be blunt. I'm 43 years old, and I'm a writer now," making us think that this is the real Tim O'Brien. Right here now, as I invent myself, I'm thinking of all I want to tell you about why the book is written as it is. O'Brien then tells us that he tells us certain things in a certain way because he wants us to feel what I felt, to know why story truth is truer sometimes than happening truth. This gives a deeper expansion and answer to why Tim O'Brien includes tricks throughout his novel, to show us that anything can be made real as long as it feels real, and that is exactly what O'Brien does. All right, so this paragraph works on a lot of ways. It's got some good quotations integrated into sentences, and it's getting at literary aspects and theme and meaning. But there's some problems too. So let's take a quick look at some of those. First of all, we have an example of a passive verb, a to be verb. And as soon as you see that to be, you want to ask yourself, is that helping me at all? Or could I get rid of it and still have the same meaning? If you could get rid of it and have the same meaning, Get rid of it. It will make your writing more concise, and it will make the verb active. So this is the example of using active verbs, and instead of to be talking, we can just say to talk. And it shortens it up, makes it more active, precise, and concise. B was getting rid of repeating words. Did you notice some repeating words? I think the student used the repeating words for a reason, and I understand that, but it's not maybe as effective as they intended. Here is where we see it. O'Brien then tells us that he tells us certain things a certain way. And it's true, he does tell us that he tells us, but it comes across a little bit too wordy, doesn't it? Another problem or another suggestion I gave you was to get rid of filtering devices. Did you see some filtering devices here? What are they, you ask? Well, here's an example. This gives a deeper expansion and answer to why Tim O'Brien includes tricks throughout his novel. The word this, what are we talking about? It's supposed to be responding to the example here, or kind of labeling the example here, but we don't really know what this means. And gives a deeper expansion and answer? Well, what is that saying? Why not explain what that answer is, instead of using these extra words that don't actually work to explain how O'Brien's example or literary aspect creates meaning. So I tackled both of these, and it was hard to make the revision. It took me a long time to figure out a more concise way to say it. So this isn't easy stuff, but look at what I was able to come up with, and you'll have to let me know if you think it works better. It's saying the same thing, but you can see it's a little bit shorter. The quotes are a little bit shorter, and I don't have the repetition, and I don't have the filtering device. Okay, so take a look. He also seems to talk directly to the reader as he says, "It's time to be blunt. I'm 43 years old, and I'm a writer now," making us think that this is the real Tim O'Brien right here now. But the verb he chooses next is more important. He invents himself, emphasis added, in order to make us feel what he felt. Using tricks allows him to expose the story truth, which is truer sometimes than happening truth, all on 171. O'Brien explains that inventing fiction that seems like nonfiction through tricks is a more accurate story than telling the truth of precisely what happened. Okay, so a couple things I wanted to mention here. First of all, I italicized invent. It's not in italics in the book. So if I do that as a writer, then I have to say that the emphasis is added. Okay, and you can do that. I think that's a really helpful trick. I don't know if it's one you've learned yet. This one is another helpful trick if you're quoting multiple passages from the same page. So I have all these different quotes here. I don't have to put 171 after each one. I can just put it at the end, all on 171. And I think it helps with clarity. You know, you don't have that repetition of the parentheses over and over and over. So it helps us kind of focus on the words themselves, the sentences themselves, the points you're making, rather than all of the page numbers. Anyway, that is another trick that I wanted to introduce you to. But besides all of that, I was able to get rid of the passive verb, and I was able to get rid of the repetition and the filtering devices. And I think the key thing is to notice that what's really happening here is I'm just stating what the example is, how the example works, and the meaning that is created, without saying, this is the example, this is how it works, this is the meaning that's created. All of those extra words are taken out. All right, so filtering devices, needless phrases that don't add anything to the sentence to avoid in the higher level essay are things like, this quote shows that, my thesis statement is, this blank connects to blank because, using the words kind of. An example of this authorial choice is, this is an example of the authorial choice because all of those things are extras. You don't need them. When you take them out, you'll find that you're doing the work without saying what you're doing, and it's much more concise, effective, and powerful argumentation writing. All right, how can I avoid errors in my writing? Well, you got to do what this kitty is doing, right? You got to put your face up to the screen and look for them. Read, reread, and reread. Watch for the underlines from Google. If they don't show up, you can go to tools and do a spelling check. You can also use Grammarly, and directions are in your packet. I think it's a great extension. I would definitely use it if I were you. You could get a proofreader. Do you know somebody who's really good with mechanics, who doesn't have any little errors in their writing? Well, enlist them to read your paper. What could you give them? A candy bar, a big hug. Maybe you can enlist some help. And you'll get something out of it in your packet because it's an aspire to do, so you'll at least get a formative point for doing it. Make sure they sign your packet. All right, so here's an example that needs to be fixed up for little mechanical errors. It reads like this. The narrator in the chapter The Man I Killed of the Things They Carried misleads the reader with a false story about Tim's killing of a man. The story is revealed to be false in the chapter Good Form, with its purpose being to show the guilt experienced by the veterans simply for their presence. Did you find any little mechanical errors? What are they? Let's take a look. First of all, the narrator, the very first thing you notice is probably it's indented now because it's the beginning of a paragraph. So we do need to hit tab and indent. The chapter title needs to have quotation marks of the things they carried. That's the title of the book, and it needs to be either italicized or underlined. And so the chapter, quotation marks, the book, italicized. Misleads the reader with a false story about Tim's killing of a man. The story is revealed to be false in the chapter Good Form. Once again, quotation marks, capitalization, showing the guilt experienced by the veterans. The veterans actually doesn't need to be capitalized. It's not a proper noun, simply by their presence. Okay, so those are the kinds of things you want to look for as you are reading your essay and fixing it up. All right, use a formal academic register. Avoid personal pronouns like I, me, you, and your. I believe, I think, you'll really see. Have you ever wondered? All those kinds of phrases are not appropriate. Avoid abbreviations like etc, aka, any abbreviation of any kind, unless it's directly referenced in the text, like GIs or some other sort of like military jargon would be appropriate in an essay on the things they carried. Calling the author by their first name ever. Don't call O'Brien Tim. He is O'Brien. You can call the character he's writing about Tim, although I still think it works to call him O'Brien and just stick with O'Brien. Avoid slang. Oh, he kind of says this, or he flat out states. If he kind of says something, I think you can say it in a better way. Maybe it's an implicit mention, or maybe you're talking about connotation. If he flat out states, that's an explicit reference. Pretty uncertain, maybe it creates a feeling of being uncertain, but all of those are slang, examples of slang. Make sure you don't reference the examiner, the reader of your essay. So you don't want to say, hi, I'm writing about, those kinds of things. You don't want to ever do that in a literary analysis. Use MLA style. Modern Language Association is our boss in the English literature classes. And so that means that we use the literary present tense. So instead of O'Brien left for the border, O'Brien leaves for the border. It's always in the present tense. Use Times New Roman Arial or Calibri 12 font. Use 1-inch margins. You only need one space after periods instead of two spaces. Indent the first line of each paragraph by hitting tab. Don't use the space bar, but instead hit the tab key. Double space by clicking line and paragraph spacing double after highlighting all of the text by hitting Control A, or do this from the beginning. Spell out numbers that can be written in 1 or 2 words, like 3, 15, 76, 1,000, 12 billion. Use numerals for other numbers, like 2 3/4, 584, 1,001, 25 million. Use varied language to show off your writing skills. How are you going to do that? Well, try to use different sentence structures. Don't always start with the subject. Sometimes start with a descriptor. Make some sentences longer, other sentences shorter. Only use that 3-syllable word if you know it. If you're not really sure what it means, oh, you better look it up and make sure you know what it means, because I can guarantee you the examiner is going to know what it means, and it's going to look silly if you don't use it correctly. Name those literary devices that you know. Is it an example of alliteration? Then say alliteration. Juxtaposition, imagery, personification, analogy, metaphoric language. Use those labels to show off how well you understand language. Repeat the name of the literary aspect, though. Don't use synonyms. So a lot of times people think, well, variety means that I'm gonna change up my words for everything. Well, when it comes to your thesis statement, you want to repeat. You want to regurgitate. Imagine you are the mama bird feeding the baby bird this knowledge. And of course, mama birds feed baby birds by chewing up the worms and puking them into their babies' mouths. Isn't it delightful? That's what you want to do. You want to regurgitate your language. If it's in your thesis statement, repeat. Do not use synonyms. So if you're talking about the weight of things carried motif, use that label throughout. If you're talking about non-chronological and fragmented structure, use that label throughout. Maybe some paragraphs you'll talk about non-chronological structure, others you'll talk about fragmented structure, but don't use a different word for that technique. Misleading, changing narrator, use that literary aspect label throughout. Same thing with the rich idea. You don't want to be using synonyms. You want to repeat the language of your thesis statement over and over again. All right, that's what I have for you for Criterion D. Good luck as you polish up these HLEs, and know that I am grading all of these little mechanical errors this time around. You can do it. I wish you well.